What we put the highest premium on was the safety of Sergeant Bergdahl. This was very held closely within the administration. We could not take any risk with this, losing the opportunity to bring him back safely.
Did you? So there was a conscious decision to break the law as you know it, dealing with the detainees and the release of them?
Candy, no. As I said earlier, the Department of Defense consulted with the Department of Justice, and it is our view that it was appropriate and necessary to do this in order to bring Sergeant Bergdahl back safely.
National Security Advisor Susan Rice defended the administration's decision yesterday to engage in a prisoner swap that released Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl to American forces in exchange for a handful of Taliban prisoners at Guantanamo Bay. Not only did Rice defend this decision on substantive grounds, but she defended against the most persuasive and damning critique being made, which is that it was plainly in violation of the law. A provision in the National Defense Authorization Act requires the Secretary of Defense to, quote, notify the appropriate committees of Congress of a determination of the Secretary not later than 30 days before the transfer or release of the individual. In other words, Congress needs a month's heads up before releasing Guantanamo prisoners. The President himself has pointed to that very same provision before, suggesting that is what's stopping him from closing Guantanamo.
This needs to be the year Congress lifts the remaining restrictions on detainee transfers and we close the prison at Guantanamo Bay. Because we counter terrorism not just through intelligence and military actions, but by remaining true to our constitutional ideals and setting an example for the rest of the world.
Those restrictions were pretty clearly overridden by the White House's own admission in securing the release of Bowe Bergdahl. Representative Buck McKean, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and Senator James Inhofe, ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, believe, quote, in executing this transfer, the president clearly violated laws. So, did the president break the law, or was he, as Defense Secretary Hagel pointed out, on his way to Afghanistan yesterday, well within his authority?
We believe that the President of the United States, as Commander-in-Chief, has the power and authority to make the decision that he did under Article 2 of the Constitution.
Joining me now, Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah and Michael Gottlieb, former senior civilian and deputy director of a combined joint interagency task force overseeing Afghanistan. Congressman, I'll begin with you. Do you believe that the White House violated the law, the NDAA, in this release?
Well, just based on the surface, it does appear as if he violated this. In fact, when that bill went for signatures, my understanding that the White House made a point that they thought that this was unconstitutional, which begs the question, why would the president sign into law something he believed that was unconstitutional? But on its surface, initial glance, it does look like he violated it.
This is a signing statement. The executive branch must have the flexibility, among other things, to act swiftly in conducting negotiations with foreign countries regarding the circumstances of detainee transfers. Mike, is this a constitutional argument that the Article 2 commander-in-chief power of the president overrides the stipulations or restrictions placed on these sort of releases under the NDAA?
It is, Chris. It's a constitutional argument, and frankly, it's not a new one. Language similar to this dates back several years in these signing statements, and the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He has to be able to make command decisions quickly in a time of armed conflict, and the president and the administration have consistently taken the position that these notification conditions could, under certain circumstances, come into conflict with the president's responsibility to be the commander-in-chief.
Mike, here's what's happening. You got all these people that have been trying to close Guantanamo forever, the whole universe of human rights lawyers and so forth, who have been told by the White House, hey, look, we can't just wave a magic wand and make the NDAA go along. There are laws, there are restrictions. We need to certify the probability they won't return to the battlefield. We need to notify Congress, et cetera, except in this case, all of that doesn't seem to apply anymore. So what do you tell all those people who say, why not just get rid of these prisoners and close Gitmo?
These are very difficult constitutional questions, and they will be different in different circumstances. And in this particular circumstance, you had pressing considerations of time. You had negotiations taking place at the most senior levels of our government with the Qataris.
But it's the law. It's the law. That's my point. It's the law.
Okay, but the Bush administration asserted very similar broad constitutional.
Don't pin the Bush. President Bush came out against me when I ran for office. I took out a 12-year Republican to get here. I'm not a Bush person.
Right.
So I wanted our troops to come home from Afghanistan back in 2011. I was one of only 9 Republicans.
So, Mike, what do you say to that? Saying
it's
the law is the law.
Saying it's the law doesn't really answer the question. Presidents, far before President Obama, took the position that they were not required to enforce unconstitutional statutes, from George Washington to George Bush
Then
before
don't sign
President
the law.
Obama.
Don't sign the law.
That's not really a realistic answer for presidents in this modern era dealing with omnibus bills and omnibus legislation.
So you think you should just sign it?
Oftentimes spanning thousands of pages and hundreds of sections, and presidents for long periods of time have taken the position that signing statements can be useful tools in interpreting those laws.
Although we should note, I mean, I should play this sound for Barack Obama in 2008 on President Bush and signing statements. Take a listen.
Congress's job is to pass legislation. The president can veto it or he can sign it. But what George Bush has been trying to do as part of his effort to accumulate more power in the presidency is he's been saying, well, I can basically change what Congress passed by attaching a letter saying, I don't agree with this part or I don't agree with that part. I'm going to choose to interpret it this way or that way. I disagree with that. I taught the Constitution for 10 years. I believe in the Constitution, and I will obey the Constitution of the United States. We're not going to use signing statements.
How do you square that?
Yeah.
How do you square that, Mike?
Yeah, I agree.
The way you square it is that there are different versions of unconstitutional statutes, and that there are different degrees of problems in those statutes. The president, in that statement, I think he has some language in it that was inartful and that he'd probably like to have back with the experience of office. But I think the key point is that when you have a critical threat to the president's core constitutional authorities, such as the authority and the duty to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the president's not required to follow an unconstitutional statute.
Let me ask you this, Congressman. Yeah. Do you think it's a good thing that we're getting people out of Guantanamo and headed towards closing Guantanamo? Because it has been Republicans chiefly who have tried to attach as many strings as possible to make sure that thing cannot be closed.
I have been to Guantanamo Bay twice. I do think it is the right facility for those certain enemy combatants. I don't think we have a clear policy on what is happening there long term. But
Wait,
I have been a proponent.
You were just audibly applauding the Constitution not less than 20 seconds ago at my desk.
Yeah.
Where is this category of enemy combatants in the Constitution or under international law?
Well, I do believe that there is a different category. If they're non-Americans on the battlefield, I do believe that Guantanamo Bay serves a proper purpose here. I don't think that the administration has clearly articulated what its policy is with
What about the 78
combatants
who have been cleared? What should happen to them?
Well, they're all different. I mean, from the Uyghurs to, there's a whole, you have to look at each case individually.
Yes, and 78 have been cleared by the government.
But, listen, the president he would have never probably even become the president of the United States if he campaigned on the idea that he was going to negotiate with terrorists. Why can't he be candid and just say, yeah, we did negotiate with terrorists and we got an American home? But that's not what the White House is saying. They're trying to come up with this other excuse that every situation is
wait a
different.
second. Negotiate with talent. Was negotiating around the surge in the Anbar Awakening, was that negotiating with terrorists? People that blew up American troops with IEDs who were then negotiated with by David Petraeus. Was that negotiating with terrorists?
Hey, look, I don't think we should have even gone into Iraq if it was my
choice. No, I know,
but
that's a very specific question because
when you trade a prisoner or a detainee, as they like to call him, in Guantanamo Bay, and you trade 5 for 1, then I think he was directly negotiating with terrorists.
That is very
different.
It was, as a matter of fact, right? It was the Qataris, right? He was not directly negotiating with them.
Well, it's like saying you're buying a house and using a realtor. You're still negotiating for the price of the home, even though there may be a realtor in between it.
Congressman Jason Chaffetz and Michael Gottlieb, who used to work on some of these issues in the White House. Thank you both. All right, you know those open carry activists we've been covering on the show? Well, the NRA has finally spoken out about them. You'll never guess what they had to say. That's next.